Hello, welcome to Apex Math's short video series. Today we are going to do a short video on simple factoring of quadratics. So we are going to look at the quadratic equation x squared plus 2x minus 8. Now notice that this is a quadratic equation since it has a squared, which is what makes that quadratic. And I consider this to be simple factoring because the number in front of the x squared is just a 1. When there's no number there, it's assumed to be a 1. If there was a number other than a 1 here in front of the x squared, it would be more advanced factoring, and we'll address that in another video. So the first thing we want to do is we want to circle the last number, the constant, the one without any x's attached to it, and we want to write that over here as a -8. And then I draw a little sort of tree underneath it, and I want to think of all the things that multiply together to give me 8. So if I think about it, I have 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. And you can sort of think of these things in your head. You don't have to write them all out. But then start adding them together and subtracting them. And if you add 1 and 8, you get 9, and if you subtract them, you get 7. Our goal is to find something that either adds or subtracts to give us 2. So since 1 and 8 doesn't work, we can't get 2 by adding or subtracting. We can cross that one off. Now with 4 and 2, if we add those together, we get 6. But if we subtract them, we do get 2. So that's going to be our choice of what we're going to use here. So we're going to use 2 and 4. Now we just need to figure out our signs. So in order to get a positive 2, if we want to multiply these together here to get a -8, we know that one's going to have to be negative and one's going to have to be positive. And if we want to add to get a positive 2, we know that the positive is going to have to be on the bigger number here, a positive 4, and the negative is going to be on the 2. Because 4 plus a -2 is equal to a positive 2, and a 4 times a -2 is equal to a -8. So we know that this is going to be our solution. Once we get those two numbers, the rest is very simple. We just take those two numbers and stick an x in front of them. So we do x with our -2 and an x with our +4. And that's it. We're done. Let's talk about two other types of quick factoring before we finished here. If you only have two terms, such as something like this, then you might look to see whether or not these two terms are perfect squares. This here, x squared, is obviously a perfect square. Any even power is actually a perfect square if you have an exponent with an even power. And we know 16 is a perfect square because if I take the square root of 16, I get back a whole number. I get back 4. The key thing here is there a minus sign? Is this a difference of perfect squares? And if it is, then there's a simple trick to solving this equation. So anytime that you have two terms and you have a difference of these two perfect squares, you take the square root of the left side, you take the square root of the right side, and then you simply put a plus in between them, and then you put a minus in between them. And that's it. You're done. All right, the last type we're going to look at is what happens if we have two terms, but they're not difference of perfect squares. Well, this may be a case where we simply have a common factor. This x squared is a perfect square, but 2 is not. 32 is not a perfect square. So let's look for a common factor. Well, 2 and 32 are both even numbers, so 2 goes into both of these. So I can factor out a 2. This is called a GCF, a greatest common factor. So I can factor out a 2, and if I take a 2 out of this, it means I'm basically dividing it by 2. So that leaves me with x squared. And if I take a 2 out of this, again, that means divide it by 2. That means I get 16. So I end up with 2 times x squared plus 16. Now if I look at what's left here, I want to just double check that this piece here is that factorable. And if you notice, this is a perfect square, and this is a perfect square, but this is a plus. And our little trick that we talked about a moment ago only works when there is a minus between the two perfect squares. So we cannot factor this any further. So this would be our final answer, 2 times x squared plus 16. The only thing we can do is factor out that GCF. So that's it. Those are the 3 types of simple factoring that we will deal with, is just the regular simple factoring of something like this, the difference of perfect squares, when you see 2 perfect squares, and when you have a GCF that you can factor out in that situation. So please like us at Apex Math. If you want to look at a more advanced factoring video, we have a long version, and we hope to be adding one to our short series as well.